I hope everybody's well. Continuing on with chapter 5 in part 3 of Christ the Eternal Tao. I'm doing find some time here to make a video. It's been a little crazy with the newborn and the other kids at home doing homeschool. So they're out taking a walk. So I'm taking a little bit of a time here to try to quickly get through this chapter. And I'm not even using my new Yeti, Blue Yeti. I'm just going to use my old-fashioned earpiece here. So chapter 5, laying a foundation, subsection 43, count the cost. In order to reach these deeper levels of watchfulness and prayer, we must pay a heavy price. Christ tells us to, quote, count the cost, end quote. We will not find success in the spiritual life until we are first ready to deny ourselves everything in this temporal life in order to be united with the incarnate Word. Quote, if anyone desires to come after me, said Christ, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me, end quote. Once we have taken up the cross, we cannot turn back. We must be 100% committed. Christ tells us, quote, no man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God, end quote. We cannot betray or doubt him whom we have chosen to follow. We must hold fast, otherwise, as Christ warns us, quote, the last state of the man will be worse than the first, end quote. Lao Tzu understood this even in his time, for he wrote, if I have even just a little sense, I will go along the great way, and my only fear will be of turning from it. It is not enough to just love God. Christ commands us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your mind. When practiced aright, watchfulness and prayer help us to do precisely this, for they unite heart, soul, and mind, and ceaselessly yearning for and calling to the Creator Logos. To love God in this way means to love him above anything else and everything else, to the point of hating your own egos, which are attached to the things of this world. Christ said, quote, he who loves his life shall lose it, and he who hates his life in this world shall keep it into life eternal, end quote. Likewise, Christ tells us to hate our earthly attachments. He said, quote, if anyone comes to me and hates not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple, end quote. This means to hate not the people themselves, but our fleshly dependence on them, which replaces our dependence on God. Clinging to others prevents us from loving not only God, but also the very people to whom we are clinging. When we deny ourselves upon entering the life of watchfulness and prayer, we cut off our former routes of escape into sensual pleasure. We root out the most subtle manifestations of pride, all longing for love, popularity, recognition, acceptance. Through going within ourselves, we identify our favorite passions, and then we begin to quench them, one by one. At every turn, we cut off our own whims, doing instead the will of the Creator. To do God's will means to follow the commandments which he revealed to the world through Jesus Christ. Quote, let Jesus alone act within you by his most holy commandments, says St. Ignatius. If you live in this way, the Jesus prayer will certainly blossom within you, quite independently of whether you dwell in the deepest solitude or amidst the noise of a community. Life according to the commandments of the gospel is the one true source of spiritual progress, accessible to everyone who sincerely desires to succeed in whatever outward situation he may be placed by the inscrutable providence of God, end quote. Christ's commandments are not mere rules, but rather existential indications of the way of heaven. When he said, quote, love your enemies, or whoever would be first among you, let him be your servant, end quote, he was revealing to us something of his own nature so that we could like him and in harmony with the pattern of the universe. He was revealing to us something of his own nature. In cutting off our will and our resentments, we will naturally follow this pattern by lowering ourselves beneath everyone, by serving them and sacrificing ourselves for them. Serving people does not mean giving them whatever they want. Through the inner knowing of our spirits, as they are informed by our Creator, we can distinguish people's demands from their true needs, and then we fulfill the true needs, whatever the cost. Such is the way of heaven, and such the true meaning of love for others. Without such self-sacrificing love manifested in actions, genuine prayer cannot exist. Quote, none of you should think, writes St. Theophan the Recluse, that simply because you labor in prayer, that is enough. It is not. We must be eager and to care for all things, to perfect ourselves in every good work. Unquote. As the Apostle John states, quote, he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? And this commandment have we from him, that he who loves God loves his brother also. End quote. If our hearts are sincere, we will shun the isolated spirituality of self-pleasing and self-opinion. We will see that God provides us constant opportunities to cut off our will before other people. No longer wanting to do our own will, we will seek out a life that is accountable to others. In the context of marriage, this means vowed accountability and dedication to one's wife or husband. In a monastic context, this means the same to one's spiritual father or mother, and to one's brothers and sisters. We must preserve in the especially when it runs contrary to our own desires and opinions. All of the ancient spiritual writers say this is essential if we are to progress in the life of prayer, because without cutting off our will before others, we can think we are doing God's will according to our own opinion, while we are really doing our own. Furthermore, it is imperative that we give up, or at least be willing to give up, all our resentments before we begin to pray. Christ said, quote, when you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father who is in heaven forgive your trespasses. End quote. Likewise, St. John Climacus writes, quote, when you are going to stand before the Lord, let the garment of your soul be woven throughout the thread of obliviousness to wrongs. Otherwise, prayer will bring you no benefit. End quote. Subsection 44, cutting off distractions. Lastly, we must cut off external distractions. These begin with the very first distraction, indulgence in food, out of which are born all other sensual distractions, from love to comfort to sexual lust to tobacco smoking to drug and alcohol abuse. Among these, the use of marijuana is perhaps the most sinister, for it gives the illusion of being spiritual while making one unable to concentrate and thus to practice watchfulness and face oneself. Having cut off the grosser forms of sensual distraction, we still face subtler distractions, this time coming from the hypnotic use of entertainment and information, which also dull the mind and hinder sobriety. Struck by a constant barrage of sounds, words, and images in the modern Western world, our conscious minds are much more disjointed and fragmented than those of former times. Our thoughts are more disorderly. However, as we continue to watch and pray, we will naturally begin to avoid these distractions as well. Activities which before seemed impermissible will now conflict with our prayerful awareness. At first, we may recognize television as a distraction, then music, particularly the crude modern forms of it, then newspapers and worldly magazines, then gossip and idle conversations, and so on. Quote, with all your strengths, advises St. Hesychius, pursue the virtues of watchfulness, that guard and watch of the spirit, that perfect stillness of heart and blessed state of the soul, when free from images, which is all too rarely found in man. This is the path of the true spiritual wisdom. In great watchfulness and fervent desire, travel along it with the Jesus prayer, with humility and concentration, keeping both the senses and the spirit silent, self-controlled in food and drink, and in all things of a seductive nature. Travel along it with the mind trained in understanding, and with God's help it will teach you things you had not hoped for. It will give you knowledge, enlightenment, and instruction of a kind to which your spirit was impervious while you were still walking in the murk of passions and dark deeds, sunk in forgetfulness and in the confusion of chaos. What a quote. End quote. That was a great quote. Father Sophrony speaks further on the need to guard against being caught by worldly impressions. Quote, the pressure exerted by intrusive thoughts is extraordinarily strong, and to subdue it, the monk must all day long force himself to avoid every single interested look, not allowing himself to become attached to anything. His constant battle is to reduce outside impressions to a strict minimum. Otherwise, when the hour comes for interior noetic prayer, everything that has made an impression will descend on the heart, causing great confusion. End quote. Last subsection in this chapter is subsection 45, putting to death the ego. From all of the above, it can be seen that nothing less than the slow, painful, merciless death of the ego is required for those who would enter into watchfulness and prayer in the right spirit. Cut off from its accustomed food, the ego retreats famished into a corner, where it cries out until at last it has no more energy, and it expires. With this, true life begins. St. Theophan puts it this way, quote, "The act of cleansing must be conducted by one's own self without any self-pity. The motivator of this act is efficacious living zeal. It is both chopper and knife, which always works extremely well when it is sharpened by grace and guided by its suggestions. It is ruthless when it establishes itself in the heart. It cuts, ignoring the cries of..." Okay, but let me finish. I'm almost done. I'm making a video. Here, give me a hug. I love you. You have a good walk?
Yeah, I'm so tired.
Right, if you give me 2 minutes, then we're going to go on a bike ride, okay?
No.
We'll throw the football.
Man.
Yeah. Give me 2 minutes, okay? Thanks, buddy. I love you.
I love you. Put 2 minutes on your timer.
Okay, I will. Go.
Okay.
Close the door, please. Close the door.
You didn't put it on, right?
Oh, my timer's right there. Don't worry about it. Love you. Sorry. So, St. Theophan puts it this way, quote, "The act of cleansing must be..." Card, please. "The act of cleansing must be conducted by one's own self without any self-pity. The motivator of this act is efficacious, living zeal. It is both chopper and knife, which always works extremely well when it is sharpened by grace and guided by its suggestions. It is the ruthless when it establishes itself in the heart. It cuts, ignoring the cries of its victim. It is for this reason that the work goes on successfully and soon achieves its purpose. But the cutting is not only the one thing. It's not the only thing. Once everything has been cut off, the zeal is present, but does not function as a knife. It acts as a guard and turns all its fierceness on the enemies of salvation, on those annoyances from which no one is free, and the shamelessness from which no one is ever left in peace." Quote. Quote, "Rise up from the love of the world and love of pleasure," says St. John Climacus. "Lay aside cares, strip your mind, renounce your body, because prayer is nothing other than the estrangement from the world. What have I desired on earth beside you? Nothing but to cling continually to you in prayer without distraction. To some, wealth is pleasant, to others, glory, to others, possessions. But my wish is to cling to God and to put the hope of my dispassion in Him." End quote. That's the end of chapter 5. We'll continue with chapter 6 next time. Hope everybody's well.